Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to create strawberry background cards using this Floral Plate-Strawberries from Lisa Horton Crafts. So there is a background part to this plate as well as a bunch of pieces to layer on top. So it's already got some great texture just by adding those pieces to it. But we're going to add a little bit more visual texture by doing some ink blending. So I have some sage cardstock here. I'm going to use some Garden Sage matte blending ink and I'm going to blend it around this background. Now the strawberries, the leaves, and the flowers are all going to have pieces that are glued on top of them. So I don't need to be super careful, but I do want to make sure that I have a little bit of color blending on there and it's not all completely flat. I'm using the new Pro Blend brushes from Lisa Horton Crafts, and the matte blending ink, it just blends really, really well. It's a hybrid ink and it's got a chalky finish to it. So it looks great on the cardstock as well as just blending on white cardstock, which I'm going to be doing for my next card. Once I'm done with that background, I want to add a little bit of ink blending to the pieces that I'm layering on top. So I clean my mat off with a damp microfiber cloth. I have all of my pieces cut out of colored cardstock. So I have some more leaves cut with sage cardstock. I have those strawberries cut out of some poppy cardstock. The flowers are cut out of alabaster cardstock, and then I have some beeswax cardstock for the inside parts of the flowers. But really, you can cut them with whatever color cardstock you want. And these pieces are nice and small, so you can use a bunch of different cardstock scraps for them. For my strawberries, I'm using Strawberry Sundae for ink blending just on the top of them. I don't need to blend the whole thing because they are colored cardstock, but I do want to add a little bit of shading. So I start with the Strawberry Sundae. I do end up adding a little bit of Loganberry just to darken that a bit. When in real life, it's hard to see it on the camera. In real life, you do see the dark on the top of the strawberry, but I wanted that to be just a little bit deeper. So I grabbed my Loganberry and just quickly did a little bit right at the top. My Tacky Mat here, I have freshly washed it, but these die cuts want to move around on me. So you'll see me holding the bottom part where I'm not ink blending just to hold them in place a little bit. Especially once I have a bunch of ink on my mat, I find that they tend to start moving around a little bit more. For the center of my flowers, I'm using some antique pink. I have a detail blending brush for these so that I can be a little bit more detailed with them. The Pro blending brushes would be too big. I would just be covering the entire thing with ink. So smaller brushes work better for smaller die cuts here. And I'm just putting it in the center of the flower. I don't want to completely cover that alabaster cardstock. I just want to have like a pink blush glow or a little bit, or just a little bit of color in the center of them. So once I'm done ink blending each piece, I take it off of my mat just to give me a little bit more space. And then for the centers of the flowers, the Beeswax Cardstock here, I'm using some Sweet Treat Interference ink. So it's going to have just a little bit of beautiful shimmer to it. You could leave them as is, but I always love the interference shimmer. So my background here, I'm going to glue it straight to an A2 card base. I'm using a little bit of Barely Art glue. I have it in a fine line bottle, so it works perfectly for gluing cards together. It also works great for assembling die cuts and whatnot. That fine line can go into teeny tiny places. Great for sentiments and that sort of thing as well. So once I have the glue on there, I gently lay it onto the back of my card. I put it right onto the card, but you could put some colored cardstock behind it if you wanted to add just a little bit more color. But I definitely wanted to be able to see all of those die cuts on there. I'm starting off for this card with the leaves. So each one of the leaves is a little bit different. They are quite easy to match. So all I'm doing is grabbing a leaf, figuring out where it goes, and then putting some glue on the back of it and adding it to the top. Now I did my background vines and the leaves in the same sage color of cardstock, but you could change the color cardstock between the two of them and have just a little bit more color variation. I think that would look great as well. I wanted the focus to be on the strawberries and the little flowers. So I thought having them in the same cardstock color to start with, just a little bit of ink blending, would be less distracting from those strawberries and flowers. Once we have the leaves done, we can add the strawberries, and each one of these strawberries has a slightly different shape. So I tend to start with the easiest ones first. That way there's less selection towards the end, and it makes it easier to select those ones. So there is one cluster with 2 strawberries. I start with that one. And then there's 2 strawberries that have little indents in them at the top for leaves. So I match those ones up, and then from there I match the rest of them up. And really just looking at the curves of the die cuts, it is fairly easy to do, just looking at the different shapes of them. I'm using that same glue for gluing my die cuts to the die cut background as I did for gluing that die cut down. I love liquid glue because it gives you that wiggle room to move and shimmy things in place. It gives you a little bit of forgiveness there. So I like to use it for pretty much everything. Now the hardest thing to match for this background here are these flowers. So for this background, I matched them up. For my next ones, I just twist them a little bit slightly so you see the green under them, pretend that they're leaves below them. And that just makes it just a little bit easier. You can see with this first one, there's 3 large flowers, and if they are the same shape, it's not easy to tell, and it's hard to figure out exactly which way to put them so that you don't see that piece underneath. Another option would be, before putting that background down, trimming these flowers off a little bit. However, I think the easier way is what I do for the second one, where I just twist it a little bit, make it seem like there's some leaves underneath there. I think it looks totally fine, and it's just a little bit creative liberties with it. Another option with the larger leaves at the beginning would be to offset them a little bit, so those leaves look a little bit fuller on here as well. I didn't do it for any of the ones that the cards that I'm doing today, but I think that's definitely an option if you wanted to make it look like there's more leaves or it's fuller than it actually is. So once I have my little flowers on here, I will be adding those tiny little circle die cuts to the center. I have way more of those circle die cuts than I need. I was anticipating possibly losing some in the process, so I die cut them several times just to make sure that I had plenty to go around. So I'll be using them for this card. I'm also going to be using them for my last card as well. So for my first 2 cards, I'm going to be keeping this background intact, leaving it like it is on the base of the card. For my last one, I'm going to start cutting it apart, and I think that's a great way to change up your background pieces. Not every background piece is going to work to change it up and to cut apart, but this one worked perfectly, and I really love how the final result of that one turned out. I think it looks fantastic, and it's a great way to use this die set as accent pieces on cards. When I do it for the last one, I end up using pretty much that whole background, but you definitely don't need to. You could use smaller bits and pieces and create several cards with it. So I have all of those flowers down. I'm going to put those little tiny centers on. So I put dots of glue in the center of about a half a dozen flowers, and then I'm using my jewel picker to pick up those tiny little flower centers and put them in the center of those flowers. Now, as I'm doing that, I'm making sure that the ink blended interference part is facing up. I want to make sure that I'm not gluing them onto the flower with the back side of the cardstock. You can actually tell the difference between the front of it and the back of it when they're die cut. So I always prefer to have those rounded edges facing down, so they just look a little bit more complete. Once that's done, I let that dry for just a couple moments, and then I always love adding just a little bit of sparkle in the center of flowers. So I'm adding it right on top of that little yellow piece. Even though I have that interference shimmer there, I just thought it needed a little bit more sparkle. Now it does cover that interference shimmer, and these pieces are so tiny that you can't really see that interference underneath there. This is not something that I had planned before, but it just adds that extra little bit of sparkle and just a little bit of extra texture to that background. For my sentiment for this one, I'm using the Very Best Wishes sentiment stamp and die set. I am going to be doing the wishes. I'm going to be doing 2 layers with it. You have an option of doing 3 layers with those larger words. For these ones, I want the focus again to be on the background, so I'm only using the 2 layers to it. For the sub-sentiments, I'm using that Strawberry Sundae stamp pad to stamp it a couple times with my Misty stamping tool. That way I can make sure I have a nice crisp image, and that strawberry color is going to match my strawberries in my background really well. There's a coordinating die set that goes with it, so I match that up, and then I use a little bit of Best Ever Craft tape in order to tape it in place. And those pieces of tape can be used multiple times, so I just save them and use them over a few times until I find that they're not sticking really well, and then I toss them. So a roll of that tape goes a really long way. I put it in my Platinum 6 machine to die cut those sentiments. Now I'm only going to be using one of these sub sentiments with my Wishes die cut, so the rest of them are going to be saved. I just put them in a Ziploc bag and put them right back in with that stamp and die set. That way, next time I go to use this stamp and die set, I'm already going to have some sub sentiments done that may work for what I'm creating, and I know exactly where to find all of those sentiments and sub sentiments when I do that. For my Wishes here, I'm using the Strawberry Sundae as well as the Loganberry to ink blend on the upper part of that Wishes die cut. So I use that Strawberry Sundae on the top, the Loganberry on the top, and then I'm using the Garden Sage on the shadow part of the Wishes. Now I sometimes ink blend on my shadow part and sometimes I don't. It really depends on the card. This one, because there's a lot of white space, because you can see through that background to my card base, I decided to ink blend it with that green color. I just thought it would pop a little bit more on the front of the card and not kind of blend into that background. So I glue those together and then add them to my background. Now I typically put my sentiments on the bottom right corner, but there's that cluster of leaves on the top right, kind of almost to the top, that I just thought it was a great place for a sentiment. That way we're not covering that many strawberries. So once I have the Wishes on there, I add the Very Best. It would be perfect if I happen to have a stamp that said Berry Best or something. I just love punny stamps when it comes to sentiments that go with the die cuts. I don't, so I use the Very Best, but I think it looks great anyways. And then to add just a little bit of sparkle to the Wishes, I add some stickles on top of that. Now sometimes when I'm putting stickles on sentiments like this, I get a little bit that goes over the edge. A die pick like this works really, really great for cleaning it up. Obviously you need to clean it up while it's still wet. You don't want to wait until that's totally dry. So I set that aside to completely dry so I can start working on my next card. So for this one, I'm using all white die cuts and I'm using the ink to color them. So I start off once again with that Garden Sage in order to color the stems for my strawberries. Then I'm going to add my leaves to this background here, and then I'm going to ink blend those leaves as well. For this card, I'm using a combination of those matte blending inks with the interference inks. I really love the combination of those two types of inks together because the matte have kind of a chalky finish to them, whereas the interference have that gorgeous shimmer, and I think they are perfect in contrast with each other. They just look nice together. The matte just really brings out the shimmer for those interference inks, and the color combinations are really quite fun too. So I have that Garden Sage there, put it on towards the base of the leaf, leaving the tip of the leaf more light. Then I want to clean my matte. The matte blending ink is a combination or a blend of ink, and I don't want to contaminate my interference pad, so I want to make sure to clean off my Tacky Mat in between doing the matte blending ink and my interference ink. And I also have separate brushes for each one as well. So for the interference color for these leaves here, I'm using some Summer Garden. This has a beautiful green color, but where that darker green is at the base of the leaf, we're going to see more of the blue shimmer. Now, if you haven't seen the interference pads before, I use them quite a lot. I have a full playlist with just using or cards that include interference inks on them. And so you can find a lot more different ways to use them in that playlist. But interference inks are like magic pads. They have two different colors to them, one that shows up on light or white cardstock and one that shows up on black or dark cardstock. Now, even the light or white cardstock, when you tilt it into the light, you see that interference color that shows up on the black. So it's a really beautiful look to it. They're one of a kind, and I love using them. For my berries, I started off with that Strawberry Sundae towards the top of the berry, blending my way down. And then for my interference color on top of it, I used Cherry Bomb. Now you can see that I didn't clean my matte between the colors, but that's because I did my matte blending ink at the top. I moved those die cuts to the bottom, and then I put my Cherry Bomb interference on it. So I didn't contaminate it at all. I did it in completely different places on that Tacky Mat. For my flowers here, I'm doing the same thing as the first card. I have white cardstock here, but I'm using that antique pink color with the detailed blending brush and blending just the center of those flowers. Once I'm done that, I wanted to add just a little pop of color to this card that's different from the pop of colors we get from the berries. So I'm going to add some Sweet Treat interference ink on here. Now the Sweet Treat is going to be yellow on the light or white cardstock, and then it has a pink interference. So when we tilt into the light, we're going to see that little bit of pink shimmer to it. So it's going to work well with the antique pink in the center of the flowers, as well as with our strawberries. So just like those strawberry die cuts, I moved them to a different part of my tacky mat and then added that Sweet Treat interference ink on top of it, and then tucked those to the side. For this card, I'm using the Sending Smile sentiment. So I have the sending die cut here, using a little bit of that Loganberry at the bottom of the die cut, and then using the Cherry Bomb interference ink on the top of it. So we have a beautiful kind of ombre look to it. I always love sentiments with an ombre look to it. I'm not really sure why, I just do. They're a great way to incorporate the different colors that you're using. So now we have our die cuts ready to go. I'm just going to add them to the base of the card. So the assembly here is the same as the last one. The only difference here is this is all white cardstock that's been inked with matte blending ink and interference ink. And I love truly the look of this one better than the cardstock one because of that extra little bit of shimmer. I purposely only use the matte blending ink on the stem, so those aren't going to have any shine to them, but we're going to have some beautiful shimmer on the strawberries, on the leaves, as well as on the flowers. So for this one, I started with the strawberry die cuts, gluing those down. It really doesn't matter where you start. I typically start with the easiest ones first and then work my way to the harder ones. I find that the little tiny flowers for this particular design are the hardest, simply because they're harder to match the different petals up. The funny thing is usually I don't have a hard time matching the different petals up with things like that, but they're just too unique that for this one I have a hard time with it. So once I have the flowers done, now I'm working and doing the leaves. And having a hard time with this design, that's why for this one I decided to twist them a little bit and make it look like they have some leaves or some greenery right behind it. It just made it a lot easier. So once again, matching up the different leaves, gluing them right on top. You see I have an acrylic block here. I use this regularly. It just holds that die cut down nice and flat, frees up my hands for working with other things. And because it's transparent, I can see right through it. So if by chance I happen to move a die cut as I'm doing this, I can see that I do that and I can lift it up and adjust it. With that liquid glue, like I said before, you have that wiggle room. So if I haven't let that glue sit for long enough before putting the acrylic block on there, sometimes it does move and shimmy and go where it's not supposed to when I put that acrylic block on. So it's great to be able to see right through it. So with those glued down, and while I'm procrastinating putting those little flowers on, I glue the sending part to its shadow. Then I'm ready to add the little flowers. So like I said before, what I do this time is I just twist it lightly so it looks like there's some greenery behind it. It makes it so much easier, so much quicker. And to be honest, I'll probably be doing it this way from now on. For this one, it just works much better to do it this way, and it goes together really quite easily. So I put the glue on the back of my die cut here, but you can easily put it right onto the die cut that is sitting on your card. You don't necessarily have to put it on the back. You just do want to make sure that you're only putting the glue on the center part. You don't want it to squeeze out. So I do try when I'm adding glue to the back of my pieces to kind of pay attention to how much I'm using, and I don't want it to squeeze out and have glue that's exposed. So once I have this done, I thought about putting those other gold centers on, or the yellow centers on, but because I did my flowers yellow for this, I could have opted to do some white centers to these flowers, but I thought it would be more interesting to just use dots of stickles. This is something that I regularly do. Here I'm adding just a little bit of green to the top of that one strawberry because I seem to have missed it with all of the ink. So anyways, I just add a little bit or a dot of stickles in the center of those flowers just to add a bit of sparkle. Again, keeping the focus on the sentiment as well as those strawberries. So I add the sending, and then I add the sub-sentiment here. This sub-sentiment was one that I had done from a previous project. The colors worked perfectly, so I already had it done, ready to go. I didn't need to create it. So I add those stickles to the centers of the flowers there, and then I will set that aside while creating my last card. Now for my last card, I already created my background. The assembly is exactly the same as the first two cards. The colors are very similar to the second card, the colors that I used for ink blending. They were all white die cuts. The only difference is I did the small flowers of the first card, leaving them with that antique pink. I didn't go over it with the Sweet Treat Interference ink. For this card, I'm using a mat around the outside or the background of the card. So first I'm doing ink blending with some Garden Sage matte blending ink, and you can see that I'm not being careful with that ink in any way, shape, or form. I'm just getting some color down. I'm not concerned with it being completely evenly inked. If I want something evenly inked, I would use solid cardstock. I personally like ink blending because you get some areas that are light, some areas that are dark, and you can customize it and make it a unique look that you can't get with cardstock. So after doing that Garden Sage, I go in with my Summer Garden Interference ink. So this is going to coordinate beautifully with the leaves, the leaf die cuts for my background here, because they were ink blended with the Garden Sage matte blending ink as well as the Summer Garden Interference ink. For this one here, I'm using different die cuts from the Nested Birthday Celebrations die set. So we have these two oval pieces here that I'm using the Loganberry first, and again doing really quick ink blending, making sure that I have some areas that are light, some areas that are dark. I just think it's more visually interesting. Then I clean off my mat and go over that with some Cherry Bomb Interference ink. I also want to do my hello sentiment here, so I do that once again with the Loganberry first, and then I go in with the Cherry Bomb so that we have that interference ink. And make sure to do the different inks on different places of the mat if you're not going to clean that mat in between. So now that those pieces are done, we can glue this mat onto the back of an A2 card base. And I kept this inside part of it white because there's going to be a die cut over top of it. You have seen it while I was doing that ink blending. I wanted to make sure that I had my ink far enough inside so that we weren't going to have some white cardstock there. So that piece there is also from that Nested Birthday Celebrations die set. It is just a little bit bigger than these two oval rings here. So it's a great way to add just a light background, but we still get some of those colors that I've used in the strawberries as well as the leaves. So with those pieces done, we're ready to start die cutting or cutting up our background here. So I have some detail scissors that I'm using in order to cut up those pieces, and I'm cutting them just right on the side of those die cuts. And to be honest, when this is done, you don't even know that this was a background that was cut up. It looks like just a bunch of die cuts that were layered in place. I absolutely love the look of the final look of this. I think it just looks fantastic and is really quite interesting. So as I'm doing it, I have that large cluster that I have in the back, and then I have all of these pieces left over here. So I want to add them to my design. Again, like I said earlier in the video, I could take this and create several different cards with it, having smaller clusters, but I wanted to create something that was a little bit fuller. For this particular video, I had only intended to create 3 cards, so I didn't really have another card that I had designed in my head. I didn't really want to use those die cut pieces. I wanted to just see what I could do with this background with it cut into smaller pieces. So I'm putting these towards the bottom right-hand side of the card. Now, typically when I'm using florals or foliage, it usually goes towards the left-hand side of the card, and I typically save the right-hand side for my sentiment. However, just the way these die cuts laid, they just looked better on the bottom right side of the card, so I left it with that. So once I have that main piece in place, I'm adding some of those other pieces on top of it or tucking some of them behind just to make sure that we have a nice cluster that looks great together. Once I was done that, I thought that center piece with those 2 strawberries there just needed to be broken up just a little bit more with some of those flowers. So I cut those off of the remaining pieces and I'm just tucking them behind the flowers just to break that up a little bit. The greenery there, while I like the way that it was layered, it was just too much of the same color on top of the same color. So the flowers do work really well to break that up just a little bit. Then I take another strawberry, tuck it in behind, and once again, just breaking up that clump of greenery there. So these ones were done with the combination of matte blending inks as well as the interference ink. So they have that gorgeous shimmer to it. They were ink blended the same as the first card, like I said. So the backgrounds and that frame that we did are going to coordinate beautifully with the die cuts that are on there. So once I have the die cuts where I want them to go, I'm going to layer the hello onto its shadow. I left the shadow white here, even though it's going to be going on white cardstock. I figured that cluster of greens as well as strawberries was enough. I didn't want to add too much color, and I wanted the focus to be on that. For the sub-sentiments here, I'm using that Garden Sage pad in order to stamp those sentiments using the Misty stamping tool. Now for both of these, when I use the sub-sentiments, I used matte blending pads. They are harder pads, so they're easier to use with stamps, whereas if you're going to use the interference pads, you have to be a little bit more gentle because they're foam pads. They have a lot more give to them, so you want to not press nearly as hard. Once I have that sub-sentiment done, I die cut it, same as that first card there, and then I'm going to add them to the front of the card. So I put in that hello first, then I'm adding a little, and I do tuck it in right behind the hello. I like those sub-sentiments tucked behind the main one, but you certainly don't have to do that. Now I realized by this time that I didn't actually show the sets that I used. So these are the sets that I used. You can see right in those packages, the Ziploc bags with the extra sentiments from previous projects. Again, I just keep them there. That way if I'm using that set, I know where to find those sub-sentiments. It makes it easy. I added the stickles to the centers of the little tiny flowers there and let those dry for probably about a half an hour. And now we have our finished card that has some gorgeous shimmer from those interference inks. I can't say how I love this particular one, how I love that die cut up together, but you don't have to cut it up. You can certainly use it as a card background. I think it looks fantastic that way, but it's always fun to find different ways and have many different ways of using your projects or products. So that second card there is once again a combination of the interference and matte blending. And then we have the very first card that used colored cardstock with the matte blending inks and just a little bit of extra sparkle added with those stickles. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate all the time that you spend with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.